Thank you for joining us for this webinar of the Professional Practice Alliance. We've had webinars on succession planning before. This one is specific to what's been happening over the past year or two. Obviously, we've all seen changes as a result of AI in professional service firms, law and other firms. And we want to dig into that today. And we're ready with 5 themes. We're going to talk about partner dynamics, and then we're going to talk about succession planning specifically. We're going to talk about influences of the market, which in turn have influenced succession planning. We're going to talk about regulatory challenges, and then we're going to end with practical tools. We've got a stellar lineup for you today. As usual with the PPA, we've got Corinne Staves and Zulon Begum, who are both partners at CM Murray, specializing in partnerships and partnership governance and all matters to do with partnership law. And then we have David Shufflebotham, who I'm sure needs no introduction, being one of the top authorities on partner performance and compensation in London and beyond. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll ask them at the end. I will try very hard to leave time for questions. But kicking off with changing partner dynamics in the AI age, if I could start with you, Corinne, how is AI altering the career trajectories of junior lawyers, and how might this affect future succession planning?
It's a great question. I think the honest answer is that none of us truly really know that at the moment. Clearly, firms that are adopting AI solutions and technology solutions in earnest are seeing the way that they use the team change. I think in some firms that is leading to more work and more interesting work for the junior team. It's certainly a different type of work to say the work I was doing when I was a junior lawyer. But then there are also rumours that some firms are structuring things so there's more senior lawyers, maybe senior associates and partners, are sort of taking on the bulk of the checking and those sorts of things themselves, meaning that there is less for the junior lawyers to do. So I think it's probably fair to say at this moment that really all of my remarks will be speculation, which could suggest I shouldn't speak at all, but I am still going to plough on. So I think, as is my usual style, but I think we will see the way that careers exist change. I think that's an absolute given. The question about what those careers look like is a really big one. I think what is a fact is that there will still need to be a senior cohort of lawyers in the future who are, and professionals who are sort of translating and exercising judgment and building relationships with clients. So somehow firms are going to have to get from A to B and produce those senior people, and that's the big that's the $1 million question, quite literally, in terms of how you do that with these changed career trajectories. And I think firms are just going to have to work it out as they go along. I don't think anybody who tells you he's got the answer, Rob, is probably lying to you.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. That's probably true. But if career trajectories are changing and tasks are changing, that means core skills are changing too. So Zulon, not so much junior lawyers or other professionals, but partners. They would have been trained on a different trajectory. Their core skill sets are different. How do they need to retool themselves today in order to catch up?
Good morning. So it's slightly speculating again, like Corinne, but thinking about maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line, from the client's perspective, why would they come to one particular firm over another? In an environment where most firms will have AI tech tools, so some of them will be very similar. Some firms may have better tech tools and better data sets, and that might be a key decision driver. But essentially, I think clients will be coming to firms because they have particular relationships with the partners in those firms. They have trust in those partners. So I think not really changing, especially the skills that are going to be required. It's kind of more putting more emphasis on those skills around building, using kind of emotional quotient much more than maybe technical abilities, but using on the EQ skills and the ability to build trust, confidence, and build those long, deep relationships with clients is going to be absolutely critical. It's always been important, but it's going to be even more critical in an environment where AI is, it's predominantly used for the delivery of services. So there's less need for partners to emphasize their technical abilities, because a lot of that will be done by tech and junior lawyers, and having much more emphasis on their leadership and ethical leadership in an environment where AI is used, because at the end of the day, AI is not perfect, and human judgment will be extremely important, and having ethical leadership where partners can make judgment calls around whether the advice output from AI is actually is it correct, and is it B, is it commercially sound for the client, is it appropriate for the client, and is are there any biases or things like that that might affect the output that the human judgment has to make a judgment call on. So those kind of skills are going to be much more important in the future, I think. But of course, partners are going to have to partners like myself who have been traditionally trained have to get with the program, and we need to become much more digitally literate. We'll need to be much more adaptable to change, because there are a lot of changes coming down the line. The whole industry is we're already seeing rapid changes coming through. So being adaptable, AI curious, and willing to kind of learn new skills like in digital, etc., is going to be really important, because as partners, we need to lead by example in those kind of spheres. And then the other thing I would say is that lawyers are always talking about being entrepreneurial, but it's going to be really critical in this environment, because it's not just about delivering traditional legal services anymore. It's providing tech-enabled services, and you need to be much more entrepreneurial, see the changes coming down the line and how you can deliver different services, and being able to spot those much earlier and be ahead of the curve and ahead of your competition. So I think those are going to be really kind of critical changes in the types of skills that partners are going to need.
Great, thank you, Zulon. And just building on what you're saying about a lot of the work will still be done by juniors, because there seems to be I think it's a myth in the market that we don't need juniors as much, because the seniors can do the work that the juniors used to do with the tools. But assuming that there is a future for juniors, they are presumably going to need to be supervised in different ways to the way they were before. And I wonder, David, do you have any thoughts on that? How partners' accountability and supervision responsibilities are going to evolve, or indeed are evolving already?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, building on what Zulon and Corinne said, really, in this sphere, there's obviously a supervisory burden and a regulated supervisory burden on lawyers, and that is set out in engagement letters. Who has supervision of this matter? It's going to become quite an interesting question as to the degree to which supervision continues in the same way as it does at the moment, or is it enough that in routine circumstances the AI in effect is quality assuring itself? Can you agree with a client that, yeah, we're going to price this such that routine legal work and checking is undertaken by this particular piece of artificial intelligence, and we'll be happy with that? Or are you still going to need that supervisory oversight? And I think probably my guess is that there will be a mix of this as things evolve, and as people become more familiar with the different products, and as firms become more or less confident in what they can do, and crucially, what are the clients feeling about the use of AI, and how sophisticated are the clients as well. So I think there's a big, very large opportunity here, as well as question over the role that the AI itself is going to play, and who quality assures that AI product. You've also got to think there about insurance risk and who carries the insurance burden of actually where does the buck stop in terms of is the AI provider, is the firm still? As I say, what sort of implications will this have for the deals and the contract between lawyer and client ultimately? And I think that will change over time. And so you'll have I believe you'll have a varied range of supervisory arrangements depending on price, client appetite for risk, the availability of insurance products, and the availability of different assured AI. And the final thing to add here, I think, in general, is we are starting to see with things like Cloudflare now, the ability for for people to opt in or opt out of providing their information from the web to AI platforms. So the comprehensive nature of AI resource and the answers it can provide might be slightly hampered there. And again, at that point, you need the human intelligence to fill in those gaps, or know where the gaps are, I guess, and know what's going in to the AI itself, what the algorithms look like.
Great, thank you. And thank you all. I think that sets the scene rather nicely. Let's get into succession planning considerations specifically now. And one of the key things, of course, is a robust talent pipeline, I beg your pardon, of future leaders. And Zulon, perhaps I could ask you, how do firms go about developing that robust pipeline in this new world, as they all focused also on digital transformation?
I do think there's going to be kind of a kind of a fundamental reset, sort of at all levels of people within our business, as to whether they have the right skills to go into the future with confidence and be able to contribute in this AI-driven world. So even starting with university, actually, and making sure that, you know, if you have relationships with the university and you have any input on the future pipeline of trainees coming into your firm, that you ensure that you help those universities shape programs that are delivering trainees that are ready for a work environment that is heavily driven by AI tools. And then in terms of your own training program for your trainees and junior lawyers, integrating AI into those training programs very deeply, and ensuring that they are trained up in how to use those tools, but critically putting much more emphasis, again, going back to that human judgment point, as to exercising human judgment. And that is about providing those junior lawyers experience of how around commercial awareness, etc. And as to Corinne's point earlier, there is going to be that tension if lawyers aren't doing all the due diligence that we used to do 20 years ago when we were doing transactions or doing discovery processes for litigation. If they haven't been through that process of having to have done that kind of very detailed work, how do they build that judgment? That's going to be the, getting from A to B, as Corinne said. That's going to be the challenge for firms, how they get their junior lawyers there. In terms of further up the scale, as I mentioned with partners earlier, having leadership development programs that focuses on how AI will change the mindset of partners around entrepreneurship, adaptability, resilience, and again, using their human judgment to oversee output that is coming from AI, and how they can spot issues and ensure that they are delivering advice to clients that is commercial for that client and correct, as we all need to make sure it is, and that it isn't subject to any kind of biases or anything that might be inherent in the way that AI has been trained. So there's going to be less so much in emphasis on kind of technical mastery of certain areas of law, rather than actually having human judgment and commercial awareness to ensure that the output is appropriate for any client. Lots of firms are already starting kind of mentorship programs, and that can be helpful for senior partners who may not be so tech aware, being mentored and partnered with more junior lawyers or individuals in the tech team, for example, to increase their technical awareness and knowledge in those areas. And I think in terms of kind of long-term planning for firms, they need to do kind of scenario planning around what they see coming down the line in 5 years or 10 years time, as to how technology will change the industry. And that's going to be quite difficult, doing that kind of crystal ball gazing, but anticipating kind of different curves in terms of technology adoption and how that would affect their business, and in turn how that's going to affect the type of skills and people that they will need in the business. And it may be that you don't need just purely lawyers, as you may currently have, but you may need those kind of programmers and technologists and other types of non-lawyer skills within the business. and whether you bring those people through into your partnership as well, which is possible if you are an ABS. So we're not purely kind of owned by lawyers anymore in many respects. And along with all of that is kind of having to deal with cultural adaptation within the firm. And it goes back to the point around resilience and ensuring that you have a culture at all levels of the business around being adaptable, being open to change, because there is a lot of change coming down the line, as I've said before, and being innovative and entrepreneurial, because that's going to be key to being successful in the future.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned culture, because I mean it's such a hot topic, and it's interesting to hear how many firms talk about how we're going to take on private equity investment, or we're going to make other changes, but our culture is not going to change. But clearly there's some cultural attributes that align with ability to change and align with performance even. And where the firm's culture is misaligned with those, then there is a need for change. But before all that, let's focus back onto partnerships and Corinne, the balance between fixed share partners and equity partners, that has been up and down over the past few years. How is that changing today in response to the AI and other pressures now?
Again, great question, Rob. I think that honestly, I think that a lot of firms still struggle with succession generally. It's one of those things that people always remark upon as being a really thorny issue within their business, and linked to that dynamic of how you bring through the kind of the more junior, often fixed share partners into the equity. When you do that, a lot of firms are very focused on the question of keeping the equity tight, so as to sort of to maintain that level of compensation for the people that deserve to be equity partners, so the argument goes. But I think in practice, sometimes the people who are in the equity are a matter of sort of luck and history rather than necessarily merit, not in the sense of you know, what you build last year, but I mean in terms of overall contribution. So I think that the kind of the introduction of technology is actually going to compound a lot of those problems, because I think firms would recognize that that's something that they already struggle with enormously. So I think it advocates in favor of really grasping that nettle, working out how you're tackling succession and understanding what succession looks like in your business, having those conversations, understanding where the pipeline of future leaders and future partners are and why. And that drives some really difficult decisions around performance and contribution. And then I think that's where adoption of technological solutions will come in, because the metrics that you judge your existing partners on in terms of, do they deserve to be in the equity? Do they deserve to be a fixed share partner? Do they get to move between the two? Then that just becomes one of the KPIs and one of the relevant factors, and it will be a particularly relevant one. It'll also be one of the factors that you look at when you're looking at the personal case and the business case for promotion to partnership. For example, all those points that Zulon raised are really, really relevant. All of that will go into the mix. So I think, yes, it will affect succession. And I'm really glad you mentioned PE, because obviously we've seen a lot of investment in accountancy, and we're starting to see investment in legal services and in other sectors, of course, as well. And I think that's going to contribute to greater partner mobility. And therefore, we're also going to have to chuck into the mix the integration of lateral partners. And where will they go in? Where do they sit in terms of status? What KPIs will justify hiring them or keeping them? Decisions around compensation. So I guess the advice is, grasp the nettle, work out what your business needs and who are the best partners, not to deliver what the partners who've delivered in the past, but actually think about it in a forward-looking way. Think about what the business needs, what's the business is aiming towards, and who are the partners that are going to drive that success in the future. No matter how much you like the people who've delivered in the past, are they the ones that are going to deliver in the future? Can you fix that? If they're not, can you coach them? Like Zulon said, if they're not, should they stay in the partnership? Should they stay in the equity? Really, really difficult questions, but firms can't not address them.
Oh, thanks, Corinne. I mean, change is very seldom driven by a single factor. So, I mean, it doesn't help to talk just about AI without the other factors that are being influenced as well. And the interest of private equity in law firms does seem to be affected by the expectation, the perception that AI is creating an opportunity for a step change in performance, a step change in client value proposition, and a step change down in cost. There are all these factors. So, David, if I could ask you to just go an inch deeper, perhaps, on the private equity issue and its impact on partnerships and succession planning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this all comes together, the P and the AI, as you've mentioned, Rob, and a big part of this, if you focus on the AI element to start off with, but it does interrelate to the P bit too. So as Corinne and Zulon have said, this journey from A to B of starting off as a wet behind the ears lawyer, gathering knowledge, turning that into understanding, and then moving on through the various stages of application of not just legal knowledge, but industry and sector knowledge through to mastery. And mastery for senior equity partners in lots of firms, as Zulon has emphasized, mastery is not just of the law, it's of the client and market relationships. And mastery in those terms is really about being able to manipulate and adapt your advice to suit very specific client and market circumstances. And that boils down to that relationship and that a bit of bringing your mastery of the law and the mastery of the relationships together. Now, the reason I go back to that is that has a direct bearing on the future of this fixed share versus senior equity partner relationship, which at the moment has been used by lots of firms to preserve profit and to enhance profit. Now, if that journey from initial knowledge capture to understanding to application is accelerated, you might see that those structures become flattened. You might see that acceleration of an ability to get adaptability and at least application of legal knowledge to a variety of routine matters happening more quickly. I'm not saying that you will, but there's a decent chance that will happen. So that will put upward pressure on senior associate levels and even into the fixed share. And the differentiating factor would become ever more apparent, as we've just mentioned, around those relationships. So there's pressure building there, I think, from the AI. And if you look at the private equity angle then, what's interesting about, well, there are many things interesting about potential private equity-backed firms, is that they still need to keep these incentives going. If they're going to benefit from the profit generating capabilities of the businesses they're attracted to, they've got to keep these internal incentives going within the businesses that provide that edifice that pushes people to work hard with limited supervision and get into those upper ranks of the equity as is, and of the profit and capital sharing ranks as it will be in the future under PE and PE-backed firms. So those two things come together, and you've got to query what then sits within the senior equity and what then sits within the fixed share partner ranks. I think there's, as we've said already, we can't have perfect vision of the future, but my sense is that there's going to be quite a lot of change in there, and the growth in fixed share partner numbers, I think, could well reverse over the next period due to both these pressures. And to Corinne's point, I thought it was a really interesting point, because I think we do see as firms merge on merger, but also with PE backing, there is more labour market mobility. But of course, one of the things that PE sells itself on is the basis that you will tie people to longer term incentive plans within that business, which sounds great, but actually one of the reasons why partnership structures and the tournament that goes on within them work is because of the flexibility and the maneuverability of people between those businesses. And they already have long-term incentive structures in there, which is buying into the business as a partner within that platform. And the danger, I think, of some of the PE investment is that it creates golden handcuffs at too low a level down the pyramid. So that you may well get a lot of people stuck in senior-ish roles that are tied into a potential capital event down the road, and or and or a small part of the equity without giving that really big incentive to drive the business forward and be that really dynamic entrepreneurial partner that Zulon was talking about. So I think that the answer, to come back to a sort of summary, is I think a lot of the pressure is going to come in that senior non-equity end of businesses, because I think of the acceleration that AI can put through it and the pressure that PE will put on those non-senior equity partner roles. I think there might be quite a lot of pressure there. We'll see.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said, David. But before we move on to market influences, staying with you, your core area, performance evaluations and systems, and how are those changing in an AI-influenced environment, and how might that change affect partner progression?
Yeah, so I think that well, I've not seen too much coming through yet, really specifically focusing on AI, because partner REM systems and evaluatory systems tend to move quite slowly, but inexorably. The systems that I'm involved with and I see firms put in place already tend to have something in there specifically about applying the correct resource for client need in any given delivery situation. So, you know, in the past, this has been about outsourcing, maybe. It's been about using paralegals to do the more junior work, etc., and making sure that the right level of resources applied at the right point for any client need. And of course, with AI, that doesn't really change. So the fundamental doesn't change. It's just the tools that you've got to apply and the resource you've got to apply will be different. And I fully expect, and in fact, I've got two client assignments on at the moment. I fully expect, and I'm anticipating that we're going to be building in very specific references to AI capability and examples of how that might be used as a way of evaluating and assessing partner contribution. Because as Zulon has said, you want your partners to be tooling up. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that the evaluatory process incorporates examples of how partners might be using AI to best effect. So I'm definitely seeing some anticipation of that happening. I haven't seen it yet happen that specifically, but I've got these two assignments coming up where I think that's going to play quite a big part, and it's already being mentioned in the brief for those programs. So yeah, we'll see, but definitely will be more specific, even though the fundamental is already there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. Okay, so on to market influences then. So this progression has always been with us, where the lower cost, where there's a downward trend in cost of services, and you get to a point where services become uneconomic to deliver if you're a particular kind of firm, and they move on to other service providers, and then the firm moves up the value chain, as it were, to new services that have emerged largely because of the changed market circumstances, more complex, bigger scale, that trend. That seems to be accelerating in the face of AI. And Corinne, perhaps you could comment on that. How this rapid progression of services becoming misaligned, if perhaps misalignment is a better word than underperforming, misaligned with the firm's strategy, so needing to be shifted out and new areas coming in. How is that affecting succession specifically?
Well, again, I think it's one of these things that's a perennial issue, in the sense that firms have always had to think about where the profitable areas of the business are. Either it's a profitable area that's sort of strategically significant to the firm, or it's sort of I hate this phrase, but it's kind of supportive of it. You know, sort of the classic example being that, you know, a VAT partner might not necessarily be kind of the driving heart of the kind of firm's profitability, but loads of teams will lean on that person, and therefore they are essential to the delivery of the overall strategic sort of goals. So I guess that we're probably looking at those two different aspects. And I don't think that technology will necessarily, and AI will necessarily, change that basic principle about do what is profitable. Yes, I think people will have to be nimble. I think what will be really interesting is how quickly firms are able to understand what strategically they need to do to keep pace to remain profitable in a rapidly changing environment. I think that's going to be interesting, and that's a huge challenge for firms because there is crystal ball gazing. So there's going to have to be some really strategic leaders sort of at the helm of those professional services firms. I'm also mindful of the fact that I think as technology solutions evolve, at the moment we're talking about it as if law firms will always be delivering this advice and the legal services or the professional services to the clients. I'm sure pretty swiftly there will come a point at which professional services firms will produce the solution and the clients will be keen to cut out the expensive lawyers providing or the expensive accountants providing that service to them. They'll want to interact directly with the technology teams, technology tools themselves. And that goes to those questions that David proposed around risk, accountability, and those sorts of things. I see from the comments that has talked about the pricing implications here. You know, how do you price that? How do you price the investment you've made? And how do you price that service if there isn't actually interaction of people? There's a solution here, but firms have really got to think about it. So I guess that the principles are the same as ever in terms of work out what's strategically significant, what's profitable, what's good and why, and run in that direction. But I just think the context, as in what is driving change, what is driving what is strategically significant, what is profitable, and harnessing that profitability, that's changing quite quickly now. So firms are going to have to be sharper than ever to keep up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for raising the question. I was going to highlight it in a second, but let's just go a bit deeper on that as well, because the cost is such an important issue as well. And of course, there's the cost of the technology itself. I saw yesterday on Peter Diamandis's Moonshots podcast, they quoted a stat that the cost of intelligence is going down 40x per annum. So that's a cost of training and inference, 40x, not 40%, 40x per annum. So the cost of the technology itself is going down, but what's not going down is the cost of organizing the firm and reorganizing the firm in order to use that technology. So David, have you got some comments on that, on how firms can engage with clients about these costs?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think there's a real opportunity for firms because they hold so much valuable proprietary information, and there's always been the ability to get the answer right from publicly available information, right? So you can look through LexisNexis, Westlaw, etc. You can find the answers there more readily than you used to be able to. There's big, with the advent of, in the UK, PLC magazine and then online and the practice notes, etc. Really sort of strong level playing field for practitioners in the 1990s into the 2000s. So that ability to get to the right answer in most circumstances has been there for a long time. It's the speed with which you can access that, which is now changing. Plus, then if you add on top the opportunity comes for firms from the proprietary information they have and the ability of AI to nurture and farm that information to their benefit when tailoring advice to the client need. So firms that have always been good at promoting knowledge sharing and have a good setup for how their knowledge is preserved and captured are going to be licking their lips, I think, at this, because that is where there's information that is not freely available to the AI. There are years and years and years and years worth of transactions that have been going on and evolving over time that firms can lean on, and practice notes and pieces of advice that have been given, the elevation of their ability to access that through the AI could provide firms with a really obvious value add to provide to clients. So I think in terms of pricing, firms have got to, my dad used to be in retail and he used to say, well, David, it's okay. Anybody can give it away. The skill is knowing how to price it and how to make a profit from it. But if you identify where the value add is from what you've got and your specialities, etc., then I think you can start to have this more strategic pricing. Yes, you're going to have to acknowledge, as people have done already in many things that used to be charged for, that aren't charged for anymore, or charged at a very low rate, or have been outsourced. So you're giving away that potential profit, but somebody else is managing it better. I think that lawyers are smart people. Lawyers are actually pretty good commercially as well. When you look at the ball facts, I think looking at where you've got proprietary value within your crawlable AI information is going to be important, and therefore I think that is going to be one of the elements of mastery of the future that these sort of partners who've got to the senior ends of their partnerships will need to be very good at in a way that perhaps they haven't been required to in the past. But I think there's a really big opportunity there.
Great, thank you for that. And just thank you for your remark here. As a client, I'm not interested in your costs. I'm interested in your delivery and the long-term value you bring me. It's up to law firms to price strategically and appropriately in relation to that value. And of course, in relation to their rivals too, because if you're not being as efficient as one of your rivals, and then the client should move to your rival or vice versa. So Zulon, let's talk about partner mobility and recruitment practices in this new world that seems to have emerged. How is that shifting?
Well, I can't say that it has radically shifted as yet. We're already seeing, and we have seen for a number of years, that firms have recruited people into CTO type roles and to help them with technology adaptation within firms, and those people might be lawyers turned technologists, or they may be purely from a technology background. So you can see firms kind of anticipating that and trying to kind of recruit the right people to help them adapt to AI. Whether in fact actually it's kind of changing lateral hiring practices, for example, of partners, I think that's still yet to come down the line, but I can certainly see in the next few years that partners, when they're looking at lateral hires, they will be looking at the types of skills we talked about earlier around the skills that partners are going to have in the future. So the emphasis on entrepreneurship, the emphasis on being digitally enabled and adaptable and resilient, and having very strong trusted relationships with clients are going to be quite key. So I can certainly see firms interrogating those kind of skills much more closely when they're making kind of lateral hiring decisions. Another interesting angle will probably be whether there'll be much greater globalization of talent now that we're remote working through digital platforms. It's much more common now, and whether actually firms will widen their net in terms of partner hiring and go to other jurisdictions where they may have much more technically savvy lawyers, so it makes it much more competitive global market than we are currently seeing. Private equity obviously is going to have an influence as talked about before. I think with PE, the growth proposition with PE investment tends to be quite kind of aggressive, often aggressive expectations around growth within the time period that an exit might be expected, usually 3 to 5 years. And certainly PE will drive some of those lateral hiring and recruitment practices in terms of looking for partners who are going to drive that growth. And again, the skills we talked about earlier are going to be really important. So entrepreneurship, commercial drive, relationships, the kind of good following with clients that demonstrates the trust that clients have with those particular partners. So that's going to change the kind of nature of the types of partners who are going to be in demand in the market. And then in terms of kind of succession within the businesses, I think firms will be kind of broadening their succession criteria, so the types of partners that they bring in the future. And again, looking at the same types of skills we've talked about: adaptability, entrepreneurship, being digitally enabled, and being able to be fit for the future effectively is the way the business is going to go in the next 5-10 years.
Great, thank you.
And Rob, if I can just come in there, certainly some of the PE strategies you're seeing for investment in firms are targeting recruitment of game-changing partners. whether or not that's going to work in terms of shifting, making a quantum shift in where that firm sits, and if it can unlock profit from the sort of legacy pre-PE firm, I think is jury's out on that. But it's definitely one of the aspects that I'm seeing in terms of strategies for PE firms, and into how essentially, you know, they can try to raise that profitability of the firm by what is it, 15 or 20%. That's going to be required for them to take their return, and for the firm to remain, you know, equally rewarded, or the partner and the new owners of those firms been equally rewarded. So I think it is an interesting play, yet to be seen whether it'll come off or not.
Great, thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left, and we've got two themes to cover, so we'll have to do that quite quickly. What I would like to say, though, is if anybody else has any questions, please do put them into the chat, unless that triggers dozens and dozens, in which case we won't get through them all. I will try to intersperse all the questions that are raised through the remainder of the webinar. But if we can get now onto technological and regulatory challenges, I'm going to ask you, David, to comment on governance in more general terms, and then Zulon and Corinne to dig really deep into the new regulatory issues which are being surfaced by these trends. So to you, David, first, how is AI changing partner evaluation and improving objectivity particularly? Is that a thing, or is it diluting objectivity?
I'm really intrigued to find out, Rob, because it's starting to be a thing. But in reality, you know, law firms have for quite some time had a good handle on partner financial output. And in terms of interrogating that further, I think there is an opportunity to use AI to do that, especially around client relationships. It has been something of the holy grail to be able to work out where within firms, admittedly larger firms, where the real influence over client relationships that are held by multiple partners in those larger firms sits. Who's got the majority of that relationship? Who's really active with it now? What are the historic links within that business? And what you're finding with AI is that it does potentially give you the opportunity to create a window on that world that you didn't necessarily have as readily available before. In terms of the client service delivery element, on the other hand, you've already got some really decent markers and proxies for how well that is delivered and the profitability that's driven from it. That's not going to change. That's the output element. What will change through AI on service delivery will be that what we've already talked about is where that mix of resource that goes into the client service delivery, how that's changing and how effective that is, how well it's priced, how well it's delivered, and what does it do for the ongoing client relationship, etc. But the big area, I think, is how client relationships are mapped within that evaluation of partner contribution, that mastery of the client relationships. Can more evidence of that and more objective evidence be brought forward? Because at the moment it's holistic. And then I think we'll also see AI applied to those harder to measure areas around firm contribution and contribution to people management and resource and talent. And I think there is opportunity there. But that's more nascent at present. But yeah, I think there's big opportunities from AI.
Great, thank you. So digging deeper then into risk, and particularly, Zulon, you've mentioned bias several times. In fact, you have too, Corinne. But if we can go deeper into that, bias and other risks, how are those evolving in a partnership governance context, Zulon?
Well, I guess the risk in terms of kind of recruitment succession practices and how you use AI tools to make decisions in respect of kind of whether it's recruitment at your trainee junior lawyer level to lateral hiring or promotion decisions within the partnership. If you're using data sets, that historical data sets, to do that. It may kind of perpetuate existing inequalities and biases, and risk, open the firm to some risk on kind of potential discrimination claims. So being very mindful of that. Ultimately, again, it goes back to human judgment. You can never discount human judgment. You can't really rely on AI to make decisions, quite sensitive decisions around promotion and recruitment, without some kind of human element to it. So I think it's really important to be able to interrogate the data sets that you do have and whether there might be inherent biases in that. So take, for example, if you're making a decision around promoting a female partner who may have had 2 maternity leaves over the last 5 years, and that might have affected her financial contribution in that 5-year window that you might be assessing, that may not be necessarily picked up by the AI. So you need to have, somebody kind of interrogating that data and understanding why that performance data may have been affected because that female partner was absent from the business for two maternity leaves. In terms of kind of protecting the firm against potential disputes and claims, it should have a very clear kind of audit trail around the data that it's using in order to come to AI-enabled decisions, so that if it was challenged by anybody, you could point to the data and that you have taken into account and discounted any kind of biases that may have been apparent from that data. I do think that there is a kind of potential risk out there for firms who, especially kind of junior levels of recruitment and trainee levels of recruitment, that often you get, and I remember this even 20 years ago, you often get a no, computer says no immediately, and that's been a decision made by a system somewhere. And if you're kind of relying on those systems, you're potentially leaving yourself open to some risk there without some kind of human judgment involved. So being careful about how you kind of use those systems, and that you can't really replace human oversight and human judgment in those kind of critical decisions. Obviously, you have your regulatory obligations. If you're a solicitor firm, you have to comply with the SRA rules around ensuring that decisions around recruitment and promotion are fair and non-discriminatory, and obviously kind of employment law issues around non-discrimination as well. In terms of kind of how you can mitigate some of those potential risks, ensuring that, again, I'm not a technologist, but I assume you can kind of regularly test your data sets around whether it might be biased, and ensuring actually that you have a more diverse data sets on which you are basing decisions on, and having governance committees and people within the business who are overseeing this, and from a risk lens, both from regulatory, employment law risk and reputational risk, actually, which is really important, that you're not driving these kind of key decisions solely through tech or AI, but that there is human judgment involved.
Great, thank you. And Corinne, so Zulon's talked about what the SRA expects in terms of bias and other risks related to that and employment law. But what else is the SRA and other regulators in precision-driven professions? What are they expecting around AI and firms' use of AI?
Thanks, Rob. Just briefly, I think they're expecting the same standards that they've always seen. For example, we heard Paul Phillip, formerly of this SRA, say that they know that AI is a big thing, but they haven't, for example, adapted the regulatory framework, and they say that something is coming. And I think that's not likely to change much. They will expect us to manage conflicts, look after confidential information, supervise people, assure good service to clients, manage client money, govern our business appropriately, not go bust. I don't think anything those things are going to change. And I think that the succession element here is that the partners coming through and the partners who stay in the business will need to be mindful of how they continue to deliver on those required regulatory outcomes, regardless of the changing shape of the business.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, well, we're on to the final round, and we've got just over 5 minutes left. Raised a really interesting question here. I'll just read it out. We coach lawyers to prepare for their retirement, or encore as we call it. Two themes are emerging regarding AI. Some see AI as a way to facilitate them extending their legal career, as it'll free them of a lot of the time-consuming work. They also recognize that how AI will help them in the next stage of their lives, so they want to be skilled in it. The other theme is one of technology fatigue and an urgency to exit law before AI is fully installed, so they avoid having to be skilled up on it. How do you see this affecting retirement, and what is the role of the firm in supporting individuals at this stage? Now, this is quite close to the final question I was going to put to you, Corinne, which was about partner exits and sunsetting. So could I ask you to respond?
Of course, thanks. And as you think, those two themes are absolutely ones that we recognise across a number of firms. I think that this probably isn't a new issue. I expect that partners over generations have seen the next thing coming and thought, oh, here comes email. I don't like the look of that. I'll get out. Or indeed, this will make my life easier. So I think this is probably a theme that we've seen through the generations. I think we will see it affecting retirements, as we've talked about, because the contribution from partners won't be the same. And I think that contribution needs to be actively managed. I think that partnerships will have a range of tools to be able to manage exits, and they'll range. I know Zulon was going to touch on this, but there will be a range of tools within the governance documents that will enable people either to leave or be encouraged to leave. So those tools should be there. The question then really is the bigger question is, how do the firms handle it? How do they engage with people on exits? How do they either train people to be able to stay if that's appropriate, or soften the blow if they're not ready to go? Things like sabbaticals or coaching or mentorships, or all those different things. So the firm does need to think both about the human side in terms of making that possible, as well as have they got all the tools, for example, powers to remove, sorry to be blunt, to enable that to happen. Because if people aren't engaging with the new shape of the firm, refusing to engage, then that's a big problem. And hopefully it wouldn't come to that, which is where the leadership and the nurturing comes in. But if it does, you do need to be able to move those people on without causing great disruption.
Great. So tools.
Back to the cultural adaptation is as a kind of organization, it needs to be at all levels. And if people aren't adapting culturally, then question whether they should still be in the business.
That's very true. That's very true. But staying with you, Zulon, so let's go deeper into these tools that Corinne's alluded to, specifically in partnership deeds. In the most practical of terms, what should firms be looking at now in their partnerships deeds to see if they're still fit for purpose in this new world, if it indeed is a new world?
Yeah, so Corinne's kind of mentioned some of those already. So in terms of kind of, I guess you kind of start with how do you adapt your partnership, and that as David said earlier is about kind of reshaping your remuneration incentives and KPIs for partners, and reflecting that in your partnership deed or partner policies around the expectations around partners, in terms of helping them adapt, and how that kind of effectively kind of has a knock-on effect on ultimately their remuneration, because the saying is you only get what you reward, and making sure that your partnership agreement sets those out very clearly, and having clear processes around how you're evaluating partners and what data you're going to look at it when making those remuneration and performance decisions. So that's the kind of a performance element in your partnership deeds and what you need to do in order to help the adaptation towards the greater use of AI. And as Corinne has said, ultimately, if people are not adapting and not contributing as they should be doing in this new environment, ultimately you would have to look at some sanctions as to how you can exit those people, and having clear provisions in your agreement to allow the firm to exit people who are not performing to expectations is really important and key to doing that. And actually not just having those things in your agreement, but actually doing it, because often we see firms not really grasping the nettle when it comes to underperformance with partners, and not having clear processes, and even if they do have clear processes, not actually in practice undergoing those processes and giving real feedback to partners. And that can be a real issue when you come to the point where you want to exit somebody, you haven't given them feedback on their performance before, so they haven't been told that they're underperforming, and that makes it very difficult to exit people. So not only having the provisions, but actually on a practical day-to-day level, actually practicing what you've put in your partnership deed is really key. And then in terms of kind of facilitating succession over the longer term, having provisions in your agreement around notice periods, and making sure the length of those notice periods are appropriate to ensure transition from senior partners who are retiring to junior partners, having standard things like restricted covenants to make sure that people who are leaving are not taking clients with them and not taking your people with them, making sure those provisions are enforceable and appropriate for your business in terms of the length and the type of restrictions that you have. You might also want to include good bad leaver provisions so that people who are leaving and taking clients, for example, are effectively penalised, whether that's kind of reduction in their equity remuneration as a result of that, or kind of longer deferral of their balances, so their capital is paid up over a much longer period than if they had left as a good leaver. And again, going back to that succession point, having kind of phased kind of retirement and clear expectations of partners who are approaching retirement as to what they should be doing in terms of transitioning relationships with clients, transitioning the practice and knowledge to the younger generation of partners is really important, because otherwise you often see a cliff edge happening where partners just reach retirement age and just leave, and no succession or no transition has happened over that period. Yeah, so those are the kind of key things I would suggest that you look at in terms of your constitution to ensure that you're ready for that kind of transition process for partners.
Great. Thank you, Zulon. Well, we're at the top of the hour now, and I know everybody has to move on to other things today. So all that remains is to thank you all, thank the speakers, and thank everybody that attended this webinar, and everybody that attended the webinar. If you're not following the Professional Practice Alliance on LinkedIn, please do. We have a group where the podcast for this webinar will be posted and such like, and other stuff gets posted too. So thank you very much, and all the best.